In the early 15th century, Europe was already tired of war. England and France had been locked in conflict for generations, a struggle driven by claims, pride, and unresolved power. By 1415, the war had become less about conquest and more about legitimacy. Who had the right to rule, and who would be remembered as weak? Henry V of England inherited this conflict, but he did not inherit certainty. He was young, newly crowned, and surrounded by doubts. His claim to the French throne was disputed, and within England loyalty depended on success. Peace would not secure his position. Victory might. So, Henry chose France. The campaign began with confidence, but it did not begin with grand ambition. Henry's immediate goal was limited. Take the port of Harfleur. Control of the port would give England a foothold on the French coast and a visible success to justify the campaign. The siege of Harfleur succeeded, but at a cost Henry could not ignore. Disease swept through the English camp. Dysentery weakened soldiers faster than battle ever could. Men who survived the siege were often too sick to continue fighting. By the time Harfleur fell, Henry's army was no longer the force he had brought across the Channel. Many commanders would have turned back. Henry did not. Instead of returning directly to England, he chose to march north toward Calais, an English-held port. The decision was risky. The army was exhausted, short on supplies, and moving through hostile territory. But retreat without demonstration would look like failure. The march became a test of endurance. French forces shadowed the English column, avoiding direct engagement while gathering strength. Unlike earlier phases of the war, France now had time. Nobles and commanders assembled, eager to crush the invaders decisively. To them, the situation appeared ideal. The English were deep inside France. They were outnumbered. They were sick and hungry. The French believed they could choose the moment of battle. Henry continued marching, aware that confrontation was unavoidable. What he could not control was where it would happen. Eventually, the French blocked the English route near a small village called Agincourt. Between two dense woods lay a narrow stretch of farmland. Recent rain had turned the ground soft and heavy. The French saw opportunity. The English saw inevitability. Henry surveyed the field carefully. The terrain restricted movement. Large formations would struggle to maneuver. Cavalry charges would be difficult. This was not ideal ground, but it was survivable. The English army took position first. They formed a narrow line, anchoring their flanks against the woods. Archers were placed forward and protected by sharpened wooden stakes driven into the soil. These stakes were not meant to kill. They were meant to disrupt. Henry understood something the French did not fully appreciate. The battlefield would decide more than numbers. That night, both armies rested within sight of each other. The French camp was confident. Nobles discussed ransoms they expected to collect. Victory felt inevitable. The English, they believed, would be broken by morning. The English camp was quiet. Henry moved among his soldiers, speaking with them directly. He did not promise glory. He promised survival through discipline. Each man knew his role. Each position had purpose. The army slept knowing they would be attacked at dawn. Morning came slowly. Fog lingered over the field. The ground remained wet. The space between the two forces felt narrow, even before fighting began. The French waited. They expected the English to retreat, to negotiate, or to make a mistake. Hours passed. Nothing happened. Henry finally made the decision. The English advanced slightly, not to attack, but to force engagement. It was a calculated move, meant to bring the French into range while maintaining control of formation. The message was clear. There would be no surrender. There would be no retreat. Only what the field would allow. And as the first movements began, the outcome would no longer be decided by titles or confidence, but by preparation, terrain, and endurance. That is where Agincourt truly begins. When the fighting finally began at Agincourt, it did not begin with speed or noise. It began with hesitation. The French army stood in place, watching the English line across the muddy field. Their numbers were overwhelming. Their confidence was high. From their perspective, time was on their side. The English were the ones who needed action. Henry understood this. He knew that remaining still would only allow the French to grow more comfortable. So he ordered a controlled advance, not a charge, but a measured movement forward, just enough to bring the English archers within effective range. When the first arrows fell, they did not arrive as chaos. They arrived as pressure. The English longbowmen released steady volleys, darkening the air and striking deep into advancing formations. Armor absorbed some blows, but not all. Horses reacted. Men slowed. The French cavalry moved forward to break the archers. The ground betrayed them. Heavy horses struggled to gain speed. Hoofs sank into mud. Formations broke apart before reaching the English line. Many riders fell before contact was even made. Behind the cavalry came the French infantry. Thousands of armored men pushing forward into the narrowing space between the woods. As they advanced, the mud clung to armor and drained energy. Every step required effort. The field began to compress. The French expected to overwhelm the English center. Instead, they collided with their own front ranks. Space disappeared. Momentum vanished. Men pressed forward because there was nowhere else to go. The English line held. Archers continued firing until distance closed, then dropped bows and moved forward with lighter weapons. They did not fight with elegance. They fought with urgency, striking exposed points, pulling men off balance, exploiting exhaustion. This was not a contest of strength. It was a contest of stamina and control. French soldiers, weighed down by armor and mud, struggled to lift weapons effectively. Many fell and could not rise again. Those behind them had no room to maneuver. Commands failed to travel. Officers lost sight of units. The battlefield became a mass of bodies where rank mattered less than footing. Henry remained close to the fighting. At one point, he was knocked to the ground, his helmet dented by a blow. He rose and continued directing movement. The English line did not retreat. As time passed, French losses mounted without progress. Each push forward only added to congestion. What had been an advantage in numbers now became a burden. The French attempted to reorganize, but exhaustion limited options. Fresh troops could not move efficiently through the mass already engaged. The field simply would not allow it. Eventually, the collapse became unavoidable. Some French units began to pull back, not in panic, but in recognition that forward movement was no longer possible. Others remained trapped, unable to advance or retreat. By midday, the battle's direction was clear. The English had not destroyed the French army. They had neutralized it. What followed was not pursuit, but containment. The English focused on holding ground, preventing renewed attacks, and surviving what remained of the engagement. When fighting finally slowed, the scale of the outcome became visible. French losses were severe, not because of reckless courage, but because the battlefield had stripped away their advantages. Agincourt had revealed a truth few expected. Preparation mattered more than confidence. Terrain mattered more than tradition, and numbers mattered only when they could be used. The French army withdrew in fragments. The English remained standing. The field between the woods was silent again, scarred by mud and exhaustion. What had begun as a desperate march toward safety had become something else entirely. Agincourt was no longer just a defensive stand. It was a turning point, and the consequences of what had happened there would reach far beyond that narrow stretch of land. When the fighting at Agincourt finally ended, the field told a story no one had expected to hear. The French army had not been annihilated, yet it had been decisively neutralized. What mattered was not how many still stood, but how completely the plan had failed. For the English, the silence after battle felt unreal. Only days earlier, Survival itself had been uncertain. Now, against every expectation, they remained in control of the field, not through strength, but through endurance and restraint. Henry V did not celebrate recklessly. He understood the situation clearly. His army was still deep inside enemy territory, still weakened by disease, and still vulnerable. Agincourt was not a path to conquest. It was a path to survival with honor intact. The English gathered what they could, reorganized their exhausted force, and resumed the march toward Calais. The journey that followed was no longer shadowed by the same threat. French forces remained present, but the confidence that once surrounded them had been shaken. News of the battle traveled faster than armies. Across France, the loss was deeply unsettling. Agincourt was not merely a defeat, it was an embarrassment to a military tradition built on nobility, cavalry, and inherited authority. Many of those captured or killed were among the highest ranks of French society. The political impact was immediate. Internal divisions deepened. Leadership was questioned. Trust between nobles and the crown weakened. Agincourt did not create these problems, but it exposed them. For England, the effect was almost the opposite. Henry's position was transformed. He was no longer a young king seeking legitimacy. He was a proven commander who had achieved the impossible under pressure. Support at home solidified. Opposition quieted. Yet Agincourt's most lasting impact extended beyond England and France. Military thinkers across Europe took notice. For generations, heavy cavalry had dominated warfare. Tradition suggested that armored nobles, charging with momentum, would decide battles. Agincourt demonstrated the limits of that belief. Terrain, preparation, and discipline could strip away advantages that once seemed permanent. The battle forced commanders to reconsider assumptions. Numbers alone were not enough. Equipment alone was not enough. Even courage alone was not enough. Context mattered. Agincourt also revealed the danger of arrogance. The French had not lacked bravery. They had lacked patience. They assumed the English were already defeated and treated the battlefield as a formality, rather than a challenge. That misjudgment proved costly. Over time, Agincourt grew in reputation. Stories expanded. Numbers inflated. Speeches were imagined. This is how history often changes as it is retold. But the reality of Agincourt is more restrained and more instructive. It was not a miracle. It was not destiny. It was a series of decisions made under pressure. Henry chose discipline over desperation. The English archers trusted preparation over panic. The French trusted tradition over conditions. Those choices shaped the outcome. Agincourt did not end the war between England and France. Fighting would continue for decades, but it shifted the balance of belief. It showed that established power could be challenged not by reckless bravery, but by careful calculation. For soldiers who stood on that muddy field, the experience left lasting marks. For those who heard of it later, it changed expectations. War was no longer just about who arrived with the largest army. It was about who understood the ground, the moment, and the limits of their own assumptions. That is why Agincourt still matters, not because of legend, not because of speeches or symbolism, but because it reminds us that history often turns when confidence meets preparation and loses. This was not a battle won by chance. It was shaped by decisions long before the first arrow was released. It was war before it became legend.